Hello there, my friends. Chris Marcus here with you for Arcadia Economics on November 13th. And some fascinating stories in the gold and silver markets over the past week that personally I think people would be well served to know about. So let's dig right in. First one, here we have reported on CNBC, although also confirmed from the Department of Justice. Former J.P. Morgan trader pleads guilty to manipulating U.S. metals markets for years. John Edmonds, 36, pled guilty. Although perhaps the more interesting part here, said he learned how to manipulate prices from more senior traders and that his supervisors at the firm knew of his actions. Interesting because obviously Deutsche Bank got caught a couple of years ago. Bank of Nova Scotia fined $800,000, which seemed a little low, and God can only wonder where that money actually goes to. But they were fined a couple of weeks ago. But J.P. Morgan has really been the focus of this story. Ted Butler and others have identified J.P. Morgan as the primary market manipulator. I'll be careful how I phrase this from a legal standpoint. I do believe that to be true. Now we do have a court confession from one of their former traders, which now does this mean that the CFTC or the regulators are actually going to stop what I would call highly illegal behavior? Or let me just phrase it like this. If I had done what I believe is happening and what we now have further evidence of while I was trading equity options on the New York Stock Exchange, I imagine I would have been in jail pretty quickly. So whether it's the regulators that are going to do something about that, it is interesting that in each of these cases, there has been at least the supposition, if you will, that they're going after the bigger fish. And here that quote that indicates, and again, that part down there is a direct from the Department of Justice site. So that's not CNBC's opinion. But certainly implying that we're not talking about a rogue one-off event here, but something that was widely known, was systematic and accepted within the firm. Certainly that's consistent with what I've come to believe based on my own research. So again, is it the regulators that are going to ultimately save the day here? Maybe so, likely not. Although again, if you look at it from the standpoint that, you know, I hear the numbers are as high as 500 paper claims for each ounce of physical metal at this point, which can go on for a while until enough people say, I want my physical metal, and then you can't deliver it because it's not there. And certainly as stories like this emerge and there's further evidence, I wonder if there's some guy like John Paulson who was well known because he bought a lot of gold in the last decade. And, you know, if you have a fund like that has a couple $2 billion of capital at its that it has access to, geez, you would think if people knew what was actually going on, that one of them would say, wow, there's a good trade here. And if enough people do that, certainly if some large funds do that, that would pressure the market, in my opinion, and perhaps bring about the resolution to this as it drags on and on. So we'll see how that goes. But if nothing else, if you've been sitting there owning metals and hearing, well, it's manipulated and wondering why it's not going up, I think this is an important story because, again, here's a confirmation. We're not talking about some conspiracy theory, but seeing that, yes, this has been going on. I think the majority of the world doesn't know about it. So I actually had a reader ask me, because I wrote a column on this, and he said, do you really think John Paulson's going to figure it out from your column, or that he doesn't know? Well, hopefully he's reading the columns I write for Miles Franklin, and we'll see that and inquire more. But as to that other point, yeah, my experience from Wall Street was that a lot of the people just don't know about this, or they're trained not to look at it. So it's interesting. And John, if you're watching, send me an email and we can talk. Anyway, another reason why it may be good to hold your own gold. Wild story. Bank of England refuses to hand over Venezuela's gold. Where to begin on this one? Bank of England refusing to release $550 million in gold owned by Venezuela over growing uncertainty about Caracas's intentions for the 14 tons of gold. From an unnamed source, we have their concerns that Mr. Maduro may seize the gold, which is owned by the state, and sell it for personal gain. Now, for all I know, that could well be exactly what he's planning to do, although given some of the other things that go on in the gold market and some of the other characters that are involved, I mean, we can't even get an audit of Fort Knox and figure out whether the gold is in there. Yes, despite Steve Mnuchin's bizarre cameo last year, I'm not necessarily convinced that the gold is safe there. And in either case, I don't see how that's the Bank of England's jurisdiction to say we're just not giving it back. So to me, that's a default in the gold market. How this plays out, again, the story is still emerging, so we shall see. But perhaps more so, it to me is indicative of what has been reported and we've heard over the past couple of years that anytime there's a large gold order like this on a sovereign level, that a lot of the banks are scrambling to find it. Again, we heard when Germany asked for their gold back a couple of years ago that what they got back, the serial numbers and bars didn't match. And so whether the Bank of England has the gold or has leased out the gold is a good question. And perhaps one day we will find out. Yet another interesting data point just in this ongoing saga. I wish I could tell you that there's a date when gold and silver prices are going to rise, although at least I feel what I can do is give you the service of not saying that until I've seen something conclusive. Yet with that said, if you've been investing in gold and silver under the premise that the market is manipulated and there's not enough gold or silver to satisfy those claims, which would eventually lead to something similar to the end of its wonderful life, certainly these two stories would indicate that that thesis is still intact. So with that said, we'll wrap up for today. As always, this video is sponsored by Miles Franklin, where I do write for and purchase my gold and silver. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them below. Thanks for watching, and I will see you again soon.